Let's go. Cool. Welcome, everyone. Just as a disclaimer, I will do the talk and presentation is in English, but I'm French, so I can take questions in French in the end. It's just that my brain is wired in English when it comes to all of those work topics. So if I do it in French, I'm just gonna look for my words all the time. It's not gonna be good. So hopefully that's fine with everyone. So here today to talk about modding and UGC. I am Loïc. I've been in games for closing on 15 years, which feels a bit more painful every day. I started my career at Ubisoft, as a Frenchman does. Been there for a number of years, doing like communication and community work internally. And then I joined Paradox Interactive back in 2018. Spent there about 5 years working on their community, working at their head of communication. So I've been like very close to very intense community and modding communities especially. So I have quite a bit of experience in that field. And today I work with Mod.io, which is a middleware company that does a modding and UGC support solution that allows developers to integrate mod support in their game and cross-platform. So mods working on console, mobile, VR, etc. With a solution that Larian picked to build the mod support for Baldur's Gate 3, for example, so it gives you an idea. But I'm doing this talk today more to talk about modding and UGC opportunities in general, right? Like what's the value of it? What's the status of things with monetization? What are the various opportunity and the benefit that modding and UGC can present for like all kind of games? So that's really the core of this talk, not a sales speech about my job. That's a job for biz dev people, not for me. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And today we're going to be talking about user-generated content support and modding. So starting with what's UGC. Like it's been, I think, a bit of a trendy term in recent years in games. We hear about it a lot since Roblox became this huge thing. It's a word that is on a lot like of investor and publisher minds. But what do we actually put behind it? I mean, first, I will tend in this talk to talk about modding and UGC a bit interchangeably because from the perspective of my work, they're kind of the same thing. There is not a huge difference in terms of how we and I approach it. But generally, like UGC is the umbrella term, right? Like it's the overarching thing. It's any type of content that has been created by users. So your players or your creators, depending on how you refer to them, and it can be like all kind of things. Like if you have a map editor, maybe it's just like a map that a player has created, like using your editor. It could be more traditional modding, which is the editing the game file of a game to make it different. I think it's probably the simplest way to qualify it. But it's the same thing. It can be a very wide field. It could be a lot of different things. You see mods that can just be like an addition, like of a new model in a game, like in like a cosmetic or something like this. You also see mods that are extremely ambitious piece of content. We talk about full conversion mode that take a game and turn it into something entirely different. You have also mods that can be like sort of entire new sets of content, the size of what you would typically see as a DLC being added to a game to like create more content, more experience, change what you can do with it. We will cover a lot of examples through this presentation, but yeah, that's the overarching thing. So modding, a subcategory of UGC as a whole, which is like a larger thing, but very much for convenience, I will tend to say modding UGC, just also to not just repeat UGC all the time, because then it drives me crazy. So I won't be like too pent up on the words and so on. I wanted to start briefly with like sort of going through a short history of like modding and UGC like within video game. It's interestingly something that's like pretty ancient. Like you could find example of like game being modified by the people who bought and played them, like from very early on. I think the biggest early cases of modding are on the release of Doom, where like people started modifying the WAD files of Doom to create a bunch of new things with it. So it was one of the first like very famously modded game. It in the early days of modding, it was very much like a local thing, right? Like people did that for themselves, for their friend. It really started evolving towards the late 90s when we started to have like distribution models, right? Like it was the emergence of like early website like Filefront, ModDB, eventually Nexus mods, like places where people could be able to like share the content they had created for a game, other people would download it. Still a very manual process, but it's sort of when the modding scene and like UGC in games started to really emerge as a phenomenon and something that wasn't just like limited to a couple of individuals, but really started to spread thanks to like Web 2.0 and so on. Then I think like the early big cases around mod and like the big stories have been around like mods becoming a driving force within the emerging indie scene in the early 2000s. So there is a couple of very obvious examples, like Counter-Strike was a mod for Half-Life that became its own thing. Same for like Defense of the Ancient, which became Dota. Same for League of Legends. Like a bunch of the huge success emerging in the early 2000s have like completely like come from the modding scenes, right? They were originally modification of an existing game, which eventually became more popular than the game themselves and eventually became their own thing. So like you still hear today when you talk about modding and UGC, sort of like, it's sort of the success story of like, oh, the mod beats the game that it was initially coming from and become its own thing, eventually its own game, maybe getting its own mods. We have a couple of examples of that, right? I think it's also like shortly after that, you get to the point where you had in the 2000s, the first couple of games, like Little Big Planet's an example where this approach of UGC become essential to the gameplay loop. Like it's suddenly not just something that come after. I think like originally modding is very much, you have this given game, it exists, it has its own functionality, and then sort of modding emerge organically as a way to change what it was, do something new. Then with games like this, you get more to the point where UGC is the point of the game, right? Like the game becomes more of a tool set, giving the tools to players to create their own thing and for other players to like play those things and so on. And it's sort of the emergence of what will become eventually like the big UGC platform we know today, right? Roblox, Fortnite. We will quickly get back to that, even if, to be honest, it's not the main part of my talk. It's also like, then in 2010, like I think it has remained like a very like organic and grassroots community, like the modding community, but in 2010, you start seeing like business model emerging. I'm gonna touch back on that later in the talk, talking about monetization and so on, but it's when you see the first emergence of like marketplace solution, modders being able to sell their content, these kind of things. Minecraft is a great example. I will touch back on that a bit later as well. And eventually, I think this has become like in the 2010 and now in the 2020s, like the modern UGC landscape, right? Like with huge platform, like Roblox is the obvious example of like a gigantic platform more than a game that is a creation space for UGC creator and has like a full set of feature and a whole ecosystem built around it. But you have also like UEFN with Fortnite that offers the same kind of solution. And like a lot of game, like arguably Minecraft is more of a platform for UGC nowadays than and a toolbox than a game in itself, right? So that's a bit like the general context, like going from this very grassroots thing to something that is today really emerging as like a genuine business model and a genuine set of opportunity within games. So, modding is pretty cool. I think it's something that a lot of game developer would agree on. It's also where a lot of game developer comes from. Like a lot of like programmer, designer, and so on have started by modding games, and it becomes their path into the industry. So it's a very cool thing, and I think generally people are always like, yeah, I want to make my game moddable because I used to mod games. That's what got me there. But like, how do I convince the business people at my studio is something that we should be doing and not just like a feature that can easily be scrapped on the roadmap because it costs some money, costs some efforts to do, and what are we going to actually get out of it? So through my work with Mod.io, I've been working with Game Discover Co., Simon Carr's consultancy and company. If you're not signed up to their newsletter, I can recommend it highly as one of the best like business newsletter in the industry. And we've been working with them on analyzing what is the impact that providing official mod support or UGC support in a game can provide comparatively to games that don't have that. So we looked together at the 1,000 top games on Steam and compared, okay, between the games that don't have any kind of like official UGC or mod support and games that have something like Steam Workshop or Mod.io or CurseForge or like some in-house solution, what's the impact it has on like their metrics, right? Right off the bat, and that feels pretty natural when you think about it, like huge impact on retention. Like player will still longer with a game that give them the possibility to access more content and create more content themselves. Like we see about 70%, 75% better retention after 2 years, and a whooping like twice better retention basically after 5 years for games that have this kind of like functionality embed and this official mod support. Interestingly, this also translates into additional revenue. You would assume often, and it's like a conversation I've had with people through my career in the field, that, well, if people can get content for free, certainly they're not going to buy DLC, right? Where the reality is exactly the opposite happening, right? Because people who are engaged with the game through free content, through additional content, are gonna be more likely to like purchase premium content when it becomes available. And it's something that the data has like proven without the shadow of a doubt. Like games with official mod support, with UGC support, will have twice the median DLC revenue compared to game without it. So it's really like a positive reinforcing circle in terms of business. What it results in is a 31% revenue advantage after 5 years. So if you compare a game that has some form of like official UGC or mod support, we don't take into account games who have like an existing modding community on Nexus Mod or something that they're not officially supporting themselves, but like games that have this integration, they will see in average this benefit on the long run. So it's something that's quite significant, and these data points I think has been like very strong in helping people realize, oh, okay, like this is the value this bring to the table. Important to note, this is with like free mods, right? Like no question of monetization there. Like this advantage of revenue directly stems from like giving the access to people to create content, share it, and access it easily for the game, right? When we look at console, it's actually kind of even stronger. I mean, the data set is a bit younger because mod support on console is still a relatively new thing. But what we're seeing is like the number we're observing in the field tend to be like even stronger than on PC. Something we attribute to two factors. One is like the games that tend to bring mod support on console tend to be quite successful games, so they're already pretty well positioned. But also, and we've observed that, like I've observed that through my work, there is a huge interest from console player for this. It's a novelty feature. It's something that is not necessarily accessible in many games. Like I think only like 2% of games on PlayStation have UGC or mod support at this stage. So it's like still fairly new. And there is definitely like a benefit of the early adopter in having those functionality on console. So yeah, that was the sort of like the benefit of like free UGC mod support, right? UGC monetization and monetization on paid mods is obviously like a big, hairy topic that has been something in the industry for quite a while. And I wanted to spend a bit of time like sharing more data about that and diving into the topic. So in the same way, like looking a bit at the history of the field, like this is not something new. Like there have been niche models around monetization since the 2000s, like where creators would like through like back channels sell premium content to other fans on niche games and so on. It's something that has existed for quite a while with like creators taking commission, this kind of thing. It started developing more as a model in 2010, especially when Valve developed the whole like skin workshop for like Team Fortress and eventually Counter-Strike and so on, started giving opportunities for creators to submit content to be sold. And then there was a very fun time in 2015 when Valve and Bethesda together rolled out a paid mod solution for Skyrim, and it didn't go very well. They had a couple of intense 4 days in April of that year, where there was a major community backlash around it. Interestingly, people often remember it attached to the horse armor thing. The horse armor thing was actually 2 years prior, and something with Oblivion that had nothing to do with mods. It was just like sort of a DLC, like a piece of like content sold with microtransaction. But I think like this backlash was really about sort of the addition of like microtransaction in premium game and so on. Something that has become very normalized since, but there was like a huge backlash on this that made a bit the topic of like paying for mods a bit of a taboo for a number of years. Interestingly, it's only 2 years later that Bethesda reintroduced the Creation Club, which is now their marketplace solution where creators can sell premium mods for like Skyrim, Fallout 4, I think Star Citizen as well now. So it wasn't such a long time after that they reintroduced it. They did it very differently. Like it wasn't a big full release. They went very gradual and much more curated and so on. But ever since, like this has continued to slowly progress. And it's now something that is much more normalized. When you look at like UGC platform, like Roblox and so on, like the whole monetization aspect is like core to the experience of the platform. I'm always a bit like wary of the comparison with Roblox because it's a bit of a thing of its own, right? I think the traditional gaming community doesn't really look at Roblox as just another game, right? It's a bit of a different thing that exists in a slightly different space, not always with exactly the same audience, but still like this model of creator economy has been very normalized by the development of big behemoths like this, who also like push on the monetization maybe much further than you would in like your typical game in terms of like tons of inexperienced microtransaction and so on. And I would say now, since 2024, we see a lot of normalization of like marketplace as a way to sell content. Bunch of game had it, Minecraft has it, Ark, Survival Ascended has introduced a similar solution as well. The Sims have now launched, after many years of work, their marketplace solution for Modder 6 weeks ago. So like, it is a model that become much more normalized and much more adopted by creators as well. We've actually I ran some survey with Mod.io earlier this year. We interrogated and had answer from like a bit more than 200 creators, not necessarily tied to Mod.io, from all over the spectrum of like mods and UGC creator, people working like modders for like Stalker and also like Fortnite creators, like all kind of profile. And what we see is like today, more than 80% of creators report an interest in some form of monetization, in like being able to make some revenue out of their craft, right? Even more interestingly, like more than 50% of them are already monetizing. Gonna talk a bit more about it just after, but like whether it's through like donation, Patreon, commission, they're gonna like find sort of like behind the scene backdoor ways to be able to generate a bit of revenue. Generally, it's quite a bit of a struggle, but like there's still sort of this is happening. Like, basically more than 40% of creators have done like commission work at some point. Whether it's been like for a studio directly or whether it's been for like other player who asks them to create like a skin, a cosmetic, or a mod for them. Like it's become like a very it's not striving because there's not a lot of revenue to it, but it's definitely become like a parallel economy that exists for a lot of games, right? And as soon as a game is going to have a bit of success, you're going to see this developing in other channels around it. So today, if we look at the landscape, it's interesting to see like how modders and creators are able to monetize. And I've sort of summarized it to like 3 models that exist in the field. The first one is patronage. It's basically whether it's through like Patreon or donation or commission, it's like modders engaging directly with their community to find a way for them to give them money, either on a voluntary basis or against access to a private Discord where they're going to access to more content, or like through commission where people are going to be able to ask for, oh, I want a specific t-shirt for the game with my face on it or whatever. And that is very widespread. I think it is because it's easy and accessible, right? Like you don't need the studio to necessarily support it. It doesn't need to be something official. You can do that on the side privately. So it's sort of like pretty widespread. And it is frictionless for players, right? Like if I play the game and I buy it, that someone is paying a modder to like create a specific mod for their own experience. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't change my game experience. I don't care about it. The drawback of all of this is like, this is very limited, right? Like creators who do this, except the most successful creator on the biggest game, are not making any serious money out of this. Like we're talking dozen, maybe hundreds of dollars a month at the very best. And that requires a game to be massively successful for them to manage to reach a community that is large enough for it to have any impact. It's also it's a black box where you don't really know what's going on. And it also it can derive into pretty toxic thing. I've had a lot of conversation with creators who are like, oh yeah, I had my Discord with a Patreon, so people paid for access to my Discord, but then I feel pressure that I need to create content every month because now those people are paying like me $5 a month for access to my content, but if I don't deliver, they're not gonna pay anymore. So it creates a bit of those like toxic models that are not exactly like healthy and sustainable. Another model that's emerging that has been like reinforced by things like UEFN or like ARMA reward system and so on is like engage-based payouts. It's the same system that also Nexus mods have, where they're gonna pay an amount of money to their most successful creator based on how much their mods have been used or downloaded. If you're not familiar with UEFN, which is the UGC system for Fortnite, that's how it works. It's basically you can put a new map or new game modes out there, and Epic is gonna dedicate an amount of money every month and like pay out to the people whose content has been the most played, right? Creators love it because it's money in their pocket and nothing else, so it's pretty good. It's a good driver for activity and content. Like it's going to attract people and engage them to create content because there is a financial incentive behind it, and players have no problem with it because there is no money coming out of their pocket, right? Like this is financed by the company, whether it's a studio or a platform or whatever, and it's money that's going directly to the creator. So generally very positive from that perspective. The main drawback and problem with it is, well, it's costly. You need to invest some of your own earning, whether if you're a platform, it's like money you earn through advertising, or whether it's part of your revenue for the game, you need to invest some of this basically as like payment and support to your creator community. It's also a system that tends to be very skewed towards big creators, because since the payouts are based on engagement and how much people are playing mods or experiences or your content, it means like team with resources, very active creators are sort of gonna manage to trust the charts, and like every model that has a long tail, it means like your 5% top creator are probably gonna get 90% plus of the revenue out of this. And then the third model is like the marketplace model, right? Where it's like a creator is gonna be able to like sell their content with more or less guidelines about what they can sell, at what price and so on. That is all very different game to game and can be like very variable. But it's basically a transaction where creator sells content bought by the player for a price, and then there is a revenue share model where some of the money will go to the creator, some will go to the studio, some will go to Steam because this is the name of the game, some money always goes to Steam, some will go to the payment processor, etc., right? It's a pretty strong model, it's pretty flexible and scalable. You're not limited by your community, like it's gonna sort of take care of itself. It's self-sustained, like you don't have costs associated to it, like you don't need to finance your marketplace, it finances itself through the player's payments. The drawbacks of it, or the cons, are obviously like there is some player negativities around it. It's a classic problem of, well, players don't want to pay for something they used to get for free. That makes quite a bit of sense. It can also have quite a bit of like challenges around content discovery, because if suddenly you give the opportunity to people to get paid for their content, they're going to ship a lot of content. So there is a lot of question about how do you regulate what people can sell, how much they can sell, do you put some like quotas, do you limit who can have access to it? There is like quite a bit of, or some level of complexity around it. But I think it's a model that has been developing a lot in the very recent year, and we see taking off quite a bit right now. Because it can also like works for any game. Like doing engagement-based payouts, if you're not a massively successful title that can afford to invest like a large chunk, or not necessarily a large chunk, but a chunk of their revenue to like sort of finance a modding ecosystem, you're gonna need that money to come from somewhere, and quite naturally, like the customer is where the money typically comes from. So, Before we go to question, I just wanted to highlight a couple of like case study and examples of how various games of various size have leveraged this opportunity around modding and UGC and made something with it. And the various utilities and effect that this kind of functionalities can have on the title. First, modding, I would say, is quite naturally an amplifier of success, right? If you already have a successful game, there is going to be a modding community generally organically developing around it. Providing official support to that community is going to have a massive impact on the element I was showing from the game discovery code study, like retention and so on, but it's going to really be seen on the game. Like Baldur's Gate, they introduce an official cross-platform mod support solution that's both on PC and console, very easy access to mods in-game. 40% of their players are using it. They saw, and they shared that data with us last year when we were working on that study, like they saw an increase of 20% of their daily active user after introducing official mod support. So obviously a massively successful title to begin with, but plus 20% on Baldur's Gate is pretty significant, right? And it's something we see at different scales of game as well. It's also a great tool to expand the life title of a game. SnowRunner, like the Mud Runner series, they've had modding since forever, like since the infancy of it. It's a hobbyist game. People want more trucks, they want more cars and so on to drive. Initially, when SnowRunner shipped, they had the 2-year plan for their content lifecycle. Like they were gonna ship a couple of seasons, like I think they had 8-season plan. But I think they're at season 17 right now. They massively attribute that to like mod support. This has kept like content flowing into the game after more than 5 years now. Extremely used by their community, extremely used on console as well, and that sort of led to like what the game is today. Another interesting hobbyist example, it's not a game I've ever worked with, and so if there are people from Asobo in the room, I hope they don't judge me if I say anything wrong, but like Flight Simulator, good example of a game having like a UGC marketplace, like quite one of the early adopter in the field. Strong hobbyist game. Mods sold there can be like very pricey, but they're really addressing an audience of like very dedicated fan who wants, the perfectly modeled airplane, the commercial model. They like sort of dream. It's a bit of the train collector paradigm, if you see, and very successful thing. Shipping product every week, maintaining a very strong audience, and through monetization, maintaining like an extremely strong creator community around it. So really engaging with their niche. Another example in terms of business model that I find interesting is like City Skylines. Now City Skylines 2, but the Paradox has had the same model on City Skylines and a number of games where they will do content creator packs. They're effectively curated UGC that is sold as a DLC. So rather than having modders selling things directly through a marketplace, they will work with a creator, have them create a dedicated creator pack that will be sold as a DLC, but flagged as a creator pack. People know they're buying content done by a creator. And so it sort of simplifies also the relation, like there is no marketplace and so on, but it's been a very efficient way for them to get new content regularly in the game. Have content that is also sometimes more welcome by the community because it's not, the studio is losing time on shipping content instead of fixing the game or whatever. They're like, no, we didn't make that content. This creator made it. So like it can be an interesting approach to it. And like creator will get a revenue share for this, which is generally something very significant for creators because your content is distributed as part of the official like DLC for the game. So obviously like the conversion of this is going to be quite strong. All those business models, they can mix up quite a bit. If you look at Minecraft, it's typically the example where they have everything, right? They have a marketplace, they have a subscription model, they have free mods, they have sort of like all of the smorgasbord of possibilities that comes with modding and UGC. And it somewhat like blends pretty well together into an experience. Like people will pick sort of what they're interested in. There are many different ways to play Minecraft today. It's massive, massive title. But like UGC and modding is like sort of a cornerstone of all of this. And players can engage with it in like a whole variety of ways. So quite a strong model as well. And generally, and to finish on the marketplace thing, like generating extra revenue is becoming now in big 2026 kind of the topic. This example, BMX Street, is a game that has gone live. It's an indie game, 2 developers, Canadian team. They have about 50,000 MAU on the title, and they shipped a marketplace solution using Mod.io last month or 2 months ago. They're already seeing now 20% of their revenue coming from marketplace compared to their Steam sales. So it is like already like in soft launch becoming a significant chunk of their revenue. And obviously, without talking of the revenue that goes to creator through like selling content and so on. I think it's a very good example of title, like this kind of like hobbyist titles. And it's a sandbox BMX game. So there is a lot of opportunity for like cosmetic, new maps and so on. But I think it's a good example of how even for a smaller indie title, there is a lot of opportunity in the field in terms of like engaging with your community, reinforcing their relationship to the game, building an economy around it, and sort of like expanding from that. So yeah, I'm actually on the time I wanted to be on to leave room for some question, but the key takeaway, and I think what I wanted to be evangelizing about in this talk is there is a measurable ROI and value to like UGC and modding. Like it's not something that is just like, oh, we know it's good, but how much is good? Like the data exists that shows there is like clear value in having this functionality and this kind of support for a game. This value, like it exists for most type of games. Like obviously some games are gonna be more prone to like benefit from it. But except for maybe like very narrative-driven experience that are very specific about being like this enshrined little gem of an experience that you don't want people to be toying with. Except for these few exceptions, most games are gonna, if they have a bit of success in the community building around them, they're gonna see benefit from this. It's also not limited to PC anymore. Like the cross-platform thing has become now a developing standard. It was still like the new frontier a couple of years ago, but it's now much more accessible, even for smaller titles. And monetization is something that has really shifted over the past 10 years, but especially accelerating in the past 2 in becoming something that is much more accessible and much more doable for games of all size. So yeah, that's for me, and I would love if you have some questions.
Un, deux, oui. Merci beaucoup. Pour les questions, ok, let's go.
En français ou en anglais, hein, les deux marchent.
Bonjour, en français.
Super.
Merci pour la conf. Déjà, c'était très cool de partager beaucoup de chiffres comme ça, qui ne sont pas toujours dévoilés. J'ai beaucoup aimé en particulier la partie avec Simon sur GameStreet, ouais. Discover Co. Et on voyait, oui, des différences vraiment très importantes là sur les performances. Je me demandais à quel point il y avait un biais de les jeux qui mettent les mods. En fait, c'est les bons élèves qui font plein d'efforts aussi sur d'autres aspects. Et à côté, ceux qui font pas les mods, peut-être qu'ils font pas d'autres efforts. Donc je me doute que c'est un tout, mais est-ce que dans l'analyse, il y avait des choses un peu pour comparer les deux ensembles de jeux considérés et voir ce qui vient vraiment des mods, quoi.
On a fait un peu ces comparaisons. Il y a évidemment une question de l'œuf ou la poule. Est-ce que le jeu est successful, donc il rajoute du modding, ou est-ce que c'est parce qu'ils ont du modding qu'ils sont successful, etc. On peut pas vraiment dire, ok, on est certain, on a la preuve. On le voit à travers plusieurs indicateurs. Déjà, on a comparé à travers des différents genres de jeux, différentes tailles de jeux, etc. Alors, on prend quand même que des jeux qui ont un certain niveau de succès. Comme je disais, c'est le top 1000 des jeux sur Steam, ce qui est quand même déjà assez conséquent comme dataset, mais ça compte pas tout. Sur tous les différents genres de jeux, toutes les différentes tailles de jeux, on observe les mêmes chiffres. Donc ça, c'est un premier élément. L'autre élément, c'est les comparaisons avant-après. Et c'est pour ça on a vraiment l'exemple avec Baldur's Gate où on voit une augmentation du niveau d'engagement, du nombre de joueurs après. On a plusieurs jeux comme ça avec qui moi j'ai bossé chez Mod.io, mais aussi avant, où on voit clairement un effet de « Ah oui, ok, la long tail, elle devient bien plus stable grâce à sa feature ». Donc c'est quelque chose qui est quand même relativement solide, je dirais. Après, oui, il y a toujours une difficulté sur la data de comparer, parce que c'est rare qu'on ait quelque chose qui soit vraiment très clean pour pouvoir dire, OK, on peut complètement l'attribuer à ça et à rien d'autre. Mais je pense qu'on a aujourd'hui suffisamment de données pour être très confiant sur les résultats. Derrière.
Merci. La question fait un peu écho à la précédente. C'est dans la long tails, le calcul qui est pris en compte. Est-ce qu'il y a une distinction sur le quota d'action qui est fait par le développeur pour maintenir le jeu en vie ? C'est-à-dire, est-ce que c'est un modding initial, en tout cas l'ouverture du modding initial fait que la communauté s'empare du jeu sur 5 ans et maintient une long tail suffisante, ou est-ce qu'il y a un besoin actif?
Je pense, on a pas mal d'exemples comme ça. En fait, je pense que il n'y a pas un besoin d'ajout de contenu pour que les choses se maintiennent avec du modding. En gros, c'est pas le fait que, ah oui, mais en fait, c'est parce qu'il y a des releases de DLC tous les 3 mois qui fait que ça se maintient. Souvent, les choses vont de pair dans le sens où, si la communauté, elle se maintient, elle est engagée, généralement, le studio continue aussi de livrer du contenu. Mais moi, notamment, je pense aux jeux qu'on a qui utilisent Mod.io et tout ça. On a quand même beaucoup d'exemples de jeux où le développement a stoppé depuis des fois 2-3 ans, qui continuent de maintenir un niveau d'activité élevé et où nous, on continue de voir plusieurs dizaines de mods uploadés toutes les semaines et des chiffres, une longue tail qui se maintient très très bien. Je pense... Baldur's Gate, c'est un bon et mauvais exemple dans le sens où le développement du jeu s'est arrêté assez vite et aujourd'hui, il continue d'avoir à peu près une stabilité complète sur la consommation de modes du jeu 2 ans après qu'ils aient arrêté le développement. Bon, après, c'est toujours un peu un outlier parce que c'est un jeu assez exceptionnel dans son genre. Mais on voit des choses comme ça sur des plus petits jeux. Je pense à Skater XL, par exemple, qui est un jeu très niche aussi. Et je crois que le développeur l'a pas touché depuis 3 ans et les chiffres qu'il voit en termes d'utilisation n'ont pas vraiment changé. Après, encore une fois, c'est toujours difficile de dire, bon, on peut être sûr à 100% que c'est le modding qui explique ça, mais je pense qu'on a assez d'exemples qui montrent que ça se maintient. Après, il y a aussi, sur la question modding versus DLC activité, il y a un vrai cercle vertueux là-dessus, en fait. C'est-à-dire, je pense que l'exemple de SnowRunner est un très bon exemple de, il y a de l'activité grâce au modding, ça donne de la longévité au jeu, du coup, on va continuer de shipper du contenu. Et du coup, comme on continue de shipper du contenu, on redonne de l'activité, on donne des nouveaux outils aussi et des nouveaux contenus aux modeurs pour jouer avec. Du coup, ça réencourage de la création de contenu. Et il y a aussi, dans ces modèles-là, une vraie collaboration qui peut se mettre en place avec la communauté. Je pense SnowRunner, par exemple, ils ont fait des trucs assez malins où ils avaient des systèmes de contest et de reward. Ils allaient sortir un DLC Arctique et du coup, c'est concours du meilleur camion pour résister au grand froid pour les modeurs, quoi. Donc, tu peux vraiment créer un cercle vertueux de le contenu qui vient de l'UGC va venir renforcer ton offre de contenu premium officiel et ces choses peuvent vraiment marcher ensemble. C'est aussi quelque chose où Saber nous avait dit qu'ils avaient beaucoup regardé les mods et ce qui avait eu du succès sur la scène modding quand ils devaient prendre des décisions sur leur prochain DLC ou même leur prochain jeu, en se disant ça c'est des choses qui ont vraiment marché avec la communauté, ça devient une source de données pour nous dire en termes de design, c'est là-dessus qu'on va vouloir aller pour les prochains contenus qu'on va vouloir vendre, quoi.
Dernière question.
Merci du coup pour cette présentation. Je vais rebondir sur ce qui a été dit sur les études. Et déjà, je voulais savoir si elles étaient accessibles.
Ouais.
Ok.
L'étude, elle est trouvable en ligne. Ce QR code vous renvoie vers l'étude.
Super, pardon, j'avais pas... Non, pardon, c'était pas ma question.
Ouais, pas de
par rapport à la monétisation, là, je comprends bien effectivement la tendance qu'il y a là. Et souvent, on a coutume de dire que quand une motivation devient extrinsèque, je faisais un truc parce que j'aime ça, maintenant je fais un truc parce que j'ai payé. Le comportement que j'ai par rapport à ce système de création qui a toujours été amateur change. Alors évidemment que tout travail mérite salaire, mais je voulais savoir si on commence à regarder avec cette professionnalisation qui arrive des changements soit de philosophie, soit d'organisation du côté des modeurs.
Ouais, bien sûr. Il y a beaucoup de réalités qui existent là. Il y a évidemment un changement de la relation aux choses. Je pense que la clé, et c'est pour ça que moi, personnellement, j'étais pas forcément, sur un point très personnel, au départ, j'étais pas hyper convaincu par les modèles de marketplace, parce que je me disais, c'est quand même très mercantile, et les joueurs ont pas forcément envie de se retaper de la microtransaction et tout ça. Ce que j'ai vu, notamment, sur la dernière année, avec des conversations avec des créateurs, c'est qu'en fait, comme c'est un modèle qui est très flexible pour le créateur, eux, ça leur correspond bien. Parce que justement, ça ne change pas forcément trop la manière dont ils travaillent. Et notamment, ce que beaucoup de créateurs m'ont dit, c'est, avant, j'avais mon Patreon avec mon Discord, mais c'était relou, parce que du coup, et là, il y avait vraiment cette modification de leur comportement où ils étaient genre mais maintenant j'ai la pression parce que j'ai 50 personnes inscrites sur mon Patreon, mais du coup ça veut dire qu'il faut que je ship du contenu tous les mois, sinon ils se désinscrire, et puis du coup les 200 ou 300 balles que je me fais par mois ils vont disparaître, etc. Là où avec une solution de marketplace, ils sont beaucoup plus c'est cool parce qu'en fait j'ai tout le contrôle pour me dire je veux passer plus de temps sur ce truc parce que ça m'intéresse de faire quelque chose de super haute qualité et puis le distribuer après. Ou alors je peux shipper des trucs rapides et tout ça. Enfin, ils ont l'accès pour pouvoir mettre les potards à peu près où ils veulent. Et ça correspond beaucoup plus à la manière naturelle dont on s'organise. Il y a aussi des questions d'outils. Par exemple, chez nous, Modaio, sur notre marketplace, on a une solution où ils peuvent créer un contenu en tant qu'équipe. C'est quelque chose qui est très classique dans les communautés de modding, de faire des collabs, de bosser ensemble sur un mode. Tu vois, typiquement, avoir des solutions qui permettent à 2 modeurs de se dire « Ah bon, on va faire une collab ensemble et shipper un mode ensemble. Et puis, on a notre revenu share automatique qui fait qu'on va chacun bénéficier du truc. » Je pense que la clé, elle est un peu là, en fait. C'est que tu veux pas casser les bonnes dynamiques qui existent dans une communauté, ça devient et c'est vraiment une conversation avec la communauté. En fait, c'est quoi les bons outils à leur donner pour que ça corresponde à quelque chose qui leur convient. Moi, je pense que le point le plus critique pour un succès sur l'introduction de modélisation dans le domaine, il y a une grosse attente de la part des créateurs, mais aussi une grosse attente que ça corresponde à la manière dont eux, ils veulent monétiser. Et il y a différentes communautés vont avoir souvent différentes perspectives là-dessus. Et le premier point critique, c'est vraiment d'avoir cette conversation avec la communauté et de trouver quel peut être le bon modèle pour eux aussi.
Merci beaucoup, Loïc.
Avec plaisir.
De voir ça.
Je serai là toute la semaine. N'hésitez pas. Merci.